Hello and welcome. My name is Gisela Pinto Caballero, and today we are talking about taking care of your mental health during the COVID-19 crisis, a webinar for childcare workers in Rhode Island. Um, the agenda for today is, first of all, welcome. Again, welcome. Um, what is the coronavirus? The effects of COVID-19 on childcare workers, strategies to cope with the emotional effects of COVID-19, paying attention to your mental health. And to conclude, we will talk about the 5 R's: remind, recognize, remember, recommendations, and resources. So, going back a little bit about to me, again, my name is Gisela Pinto Caballero. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have been working in the mental health field for the past 18 years, 12 of which I've been in private practice. I have worked with children up to adults. Now I only work with adults, uh, anywhere from 18 to early 60s, I want to say. So that's a little bit about me. I wanted just to give you a little bit of my background in terms of my mental health experience. So today, I wanted to begin. Well, first of all, let's go over the objectives, right? So you know what to expect for today. So at the end of this presentation, childcare workers will be able to understand COVID-19 in the context of a world crisis, identify their feelings related to COVID-19, understand the effects of COVID on your mental health, how to cope with the effects of this pandemic, and know when and how to look for professional help. So those are the objectives for us today. Before we begin and get into really the meat of this webinar, I wanted to just take a couple of minutes and go through a really small, quick breathing exercise. So to begin, if you could sit up straight, I will assume you are seated somewhere. So just make sure you're comfortable wherever you're seated, that your back is straight up against the back of a chair, or if you're on a couch, or maybe you're in bed, I don't know. Um, but just make sure you're comfortable and your back is straight. And if your feet can touch the floor, that's great. Um, and just have your palms wherever they feel comfortable. So what we're going to do is just take a couple of breaths, right? So we're going to inhale deeply and then slowly exhale. Let's do that 2 more times. Inhale, stomach expanding out. Slowly let it go. One more time. Inhale deeply and let it out. I hope that felt wonderful for you to begin our webinar. What is the coronavirus? What is a coronavirus? The coronavirus is an extensive family of viruses that can cause illnesses to animals as well as human beings. The recently discovered coronavirus causes the disease we know now of as COVID-19. This is according to the World Health Organization. What is COVID-19 really? It's an infectious disease caused by the coronavirus that has been recently discovered. This new virus, the coronavirus, like the illness it provokes, the COVID-19, were not known until the spread in Wuhan, China, this past December 2019. The World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic on March 11th, 2020. I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, remember that. Now I'm going to get into more specifically what is a pandemic, right? So we may use this word, or we may have heard it around a lot lately. So the World Health Organization defines a pandemic as a worldwide spread of a new disease. And a pandemic is considered a crisis. What is a crisis? It's an unstable and dangerous event affecting an individual, group, community, or an entire society. So we know that COVID-19 is a crisis. In fact, it's a healthcare crisis. There are variants to crisis. There are different types of crises: emotional, economic, political, social. A person, an individual can also experience a crisis. But we are talking about, this pandemic, this crisis, COVID-19, as something that has affected each of those systems, right? An individual, it has affected individuals, groups, communities, entire society all over the world. And so we can safely say it's not only a healthcare crisis, but also an emotional crisis that we are dealing with, economic, political, and social. Childcare workers are especially vulnerable in this crisis during this pandemic. Why? Because they have become essentially essential workers as people started going back to their work locations. Childcare workers are also exposed to the economic, emotional, social, and healthcare crisis that we have been experiencing. What have been the common reactions to COVID-19 thus far? Stress, anxiety, fear, loss. So we'll go through each of these separately. Stress, right? Why stress? Well, lack of information, right? From the beginning, well, we'll say March, when the World Health Organization deemed COVID-19 a pandemic. And when I think most of us understood that this something big was happening, stress ensued. Um, People began to ask themselves, what is going on? How do I function, right? And so there's stress because there was not a lot of information to begin with. Anxiety, right? Sometimes uncontrollable anxiety, a lot of intense emotions that led to more anxiety, right? Like anger is a common emotion that can lead also for someone to feel anxious. The new healthcare requirements. Now, as childcare workers, there have been new healthcare requirements that undoubtedly can cause anxiety. Having a whirlwind of emotions like anxiety, worry, and risk, right? Those in and of itself can cause anxiety, by the way. But these have been some of the common reactions, right? A whirlwind of emotions. Anxiety, again, right? The new requirements of health and hygiene that childcare workers have to meet. Worry for their families, right? For the families that have had to be in quarantine if they have um, had COVID, or at the beginning of this healthcare crisis, many of us have had to be on lockdown, as they say. So there's worry when things like that happen. Risk, right? There's this like risk, this feeling of what's going to happen if someone that I care for, one of the children that I care for, comes down with COVID, right? So then there's this risk to families, to their families, and to themselves because of the children that they are taking care of in their homes as childcare workers. Fears, not knowing, first of all, not knowing how to express fear. Um, Fear because of, am I going to have work? Am I not going to have work? Fear again for your family, extended family who may be sick or could be at risk for getting sick. Um, Fear of the future, again, the unknown, not having money, if you're not working due to the pandemic, this healthcare crisis. Many people have been laid off, and many people stopped working. Not everyone has had the ability to work online. So the fear of not having enough money. It's the end of the world. A lot of people believing like, wow, it's the end of the world. No one, or a lot of people, have not experienced something like COVID-19 in their lifetime. Not knowing how to manage the reopening, right? The reopening of going back to work, what that's going to look like. There's a lot of fear involved in how to manage um, ourselves, right? Going back to work, the risks, how, handling, again, our hygiene, taking care of ourselves, just a lot of unknown, not knowing how the reopening is going to take place, if it's even going to work. Fear of not having control is big, right? When we go through something unknown, there's a fear, first of all, of the unknown. And with that comes a lot of feeling of not having any control. Loss. During this time, families have lost their spouses, their fathers, their mothers, cousins, right? There's been a lot of loss. Friends and neighbors as well. There's been it's been devastating. It's really been devastating in terms of loss for many people. Now we are going to we were talking about these common reactions, right? The fears, these emotions, stress, anxiety, just to go back a little bit. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how to cope with the stress, right? We say, like, one of the common reactions is stress. How do you cope with stress? One of the ways is to increase your sense of safety. And it's really, we think of, like, what are we going to do to feel safe, right? And it's basically following the guidelines, the healthcare guidelines, the social distancing, the washing our hands, the hygiene, right? And having a plan also can increase your sense of safety. Having a plan, knowing, like, well, when I go to work, if I'm required to go back into work, this is the plan that I follow. This is the plan that we are following at work. That helps you have an increased sense of safety. Maybe if you're going out for groceries, maybe you have your hand sanitizer in your car, and you have a couple of masks in your car. Like, just plans, like simple plans like this, can help you feel a sense of safety. They increase your sense of safety when so much feels unsafe and unknown. Something else you can do is stay connected. Seeking support, right? Asking for help is really essential, whether it's through friends or professional help, but seeking support from family members as well, is a great way, first of all, to help us stay connected. Um, and just knowing that, it's okay to ask for support is also in and of itself something that can help relieve stress, being able to receive support. Another way to stay connected is through really creative communication. I think many of us have experienced having to be creative with how we stay connected, because we've had to maintain our distance from people, our physical distance. The computer, our smartphones have been the best way for us to communicate and stay in contact with people, stay connected. And using systems that are available to us, like Zoom, for example, people have been having, a lot of creative kinds of communication. Maybe you can't, well, many people were not initially able to get together at all. And so they turned to going online and creating, like, get-togethers, like Friday Zoom calls, right? Friday, a lot of people like to gather with friends, de-stress from work. And so people had done that, and I think continue to do so through Zoom, just having like Zoom parties over the weekend, right? So those are some forms of how we can be creative with the communication that's available for us in order to stay connected. And again, a way of relieving stress. Another way is to increase our relaxation, right? To participate and practice in relaxing activities. What do those look like? What are some relaxing activities? Maybe listening to a guided meditation, practicing yoga, um, going outside, being with nature. Those are some relaxing activities. For you, it may be different, but these are just some examples that are definitely relaxing and can overall increase, the more you practice them, they increase your relaxation. Reducing the amount of time seeing and hearing the news is really, really big and critical initially, and it continues to be. Being mindful, right, of how long we watch the news, how often we watch the news, can really, really help increase our relaxation and therefore decrease stress. Improving our sense of control and resilience. Well, so again, right, we go back to this control. A common reaction again to this crisis has been feeling like, that you don't have any control, and that causing stress and anxiety. And so to deal with this, right, we can improve our sense of control and resilience. One of the ways to do this is by being in acceptance of what is, right? Be in acceptance of the current situation and being able to move, take steps forward, knowing that this is our reality right now. So accepting where we are and what we're able to do with where we are. Another example of improving your sense of control and resilience is to modify what it means to have a good day. So maybe in the past, a good day was, to go visit some friends, a family member after work, maybe before work, or maybe during your break, your lunch break. And now we have to modify that, right? Well, now we get to create a new good day. What does it mean? Maybe a good day is like, seeing someone on Zoom, right? Seeing your family now once a day and looking forward to that, that time that you get to see them on FaceTime or on Zoom or whatever way you choose to connect with your family, seeing them visually since you can't see them in person all the time or the way you'd like. Um, that is and can be an example of you having a good day. So we have to modify our definition of what was a good day and modify it to what it can be now. Remaining hopeful. It seems very cliche, right? Just be hopeful. But it is really important to know what truly, how can we remain hopeful and therefore help reduce and cope with stress. Being kind to ourselves is a way to remain hopeful, is a way to remain positive. Changing our negative thoughts, right? Changing our negative thoughts to positive thoughts is another way that will help us remain hopeful for the future. Connecting back with your beliefs, your spirituality, and inspiration from others, receiving inspiration from others, allowing ourselves to be inspired by others, all of these can help us remain hopeful and therefore cope better with the stress that has ensued due to this crisis, due to this pandemic. Now let's talk about fear, right? Because fear is something else, right, that has been a common reaction in COVID. First, we talked about stress, now we're going to talk about fear. And understanding it, I think, is really more helpful, besides knowing, how to cope with fear, but understanding it and how we can work with fear. Well, what is it, first of all? What is fear? How can it help us? And how it's not helpful in the long term? Well, fear is a normal emotion, first of all. It's normal. All of our feelings, in fact, are normal. And so fear is another, a natural emotion, and it serves as a natural alarm system, right? It alerts us. It gives us information. A possible response, or some possible responses to when we feel fear, are fleeing, fighting, or confronting, or freezing. So these are some common responses to fear. Flee, fight, or freeze. You've heard of them, I'm sure. When this happens many times when people fear, like, get into a panic, it's like they don't know what to do, and so they freeze, right? So that's being a response. That's a response to a common response to experiencing fear. Fear, since it's a natural alarm system, right? It serves like naturally. It's telling us something is off, but it's also giving us information. It makes it so that we can experiment suffering in a situation that we see as a threat, and it gives us valuable information indicating when there's an imbalance between a threat or a perceived threat and the resources that we have available to confront this threat and be able to resolve it. So we are talking about basically a rational and natural fear, right? So many times when we experience fear, it is something that is rational and natural. We can also experience irrational fear, but we're talking about something that, can happen naturally because, fear is a normal emotion and it's there to give us information. It is important to be able to feel fear, to understand it and pay attention to it. So many times we have the natural tendency to want to avoid what is uncomfortable. Fear, of course, is an uncomfortable emotion. And so we have the tendency, the natural tendency to want to avoid it, but it's really of utmost importance to allow it to be what it is. And so allow ourselves to feel it, to understand what is happening, the information it's giving us, how it's alerting us. And, again, paying attention to what it is. Um, Also, it's important to know that, fear can increase in intensity, right? It could, have you ever felt, like a little scared and then all of a sudden like that fear intensified? So in terms of understanding fear, it's important to know that it can intensify, and it does not help when it stays with us, right? All of our emotions are not meant to be with us long term. Our feelings are fleeing, our feelings change. So even though we can feel all of our feelings, often, it doesn't mean that it's helpful for them to be with us all the time, right? We as human beings are allowed to experience many emotions, and they change. And so, with that said, it's good to know we don't want fear to be with us long term. We don't want it to stay with us longer than it needs to. Now we're going to go on to this other topic that has to do with death and COVID. Many have experienced the death of loved ones, like we said, right? Loved ones, neighbors, and friends. So this has been very difficult. It has impacted, this pandemic has worldwide reach. And so death has there's been a lot of death. And there are traumatic aspects to the way people have died. And this really has affected a lot of the ways we traditionally or culturally or normally treat death, or how we cope with it when it happens, right? So sometimes, like, we have traditions depending on your cultures of what you would do, having a wake, having some kind of ceremony, and these have been impacted. These have been altered, and in many, if not all cases, they just have been non-existent because of COVID. And this feeling of powerlessness, right? When there's just this overwhelming sense of loss, people can feel very powerless. There's, because of, again, the large scale impact of death, there's definitely this sense of powerlessness that has overcome many of us. It is important to know that if you or someone is going through a loss, especially related to COVID, please seek professional help. Now, going back to this traumatic aspect of not only, death, but the traumatic aspect of COVID in general, right? So what is trauma? Trauma is being exposed to a traumatic event like a sexual assault or a car accident or child abuse. But it is not necessary to have any experience of violence to experience trauma. So it's safe to say that, many people have been or will be experiencing symptoms of trauma due to COVID because of the way it came about. Again, COVID-19 can be classified as a traumatic experience due to the large scale, due to the impact, the physical and emotional impact it has had and continues to have. These are the ways trauma can manifest, and there are others. These are some of the symptoms: nausea and vomiting, difficulty concentrating, anxiety, irritability, fear, chest pain, headaches, confusion, fatigue, and thirst. Trauma can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. So it's important to know, right? Not all trauma is going to lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. But just so you have information, some symptoms of PTSD are for someone to perceive the world as a dangerous place, nightmares related to the pandemic, increased thoughts and feelings that can cause distress, irritability, difficulty sleeping. So I just want to go back and just say that, that we can have common symptoms when someone is facing trauma and when someone is experiencing PTSD. And also, there are some common symptoms when someone is feeling depressed, irritability, difficulty sleeping. fatigue, difficulty concentrating. So there are many symptoms that can override. And so it's important not to diagnose ourselves. And if you're experiencing any of these symptoms for at least a couple of weeks, it's good to seek professional help so that you can have a formal diagnosis and not diagnose yourself. So, what does this all mean for me as a childcare worker? What does this mean for me as a childcare worker? Well, first and foremost, the role of childcare workers are so important and unique, right, during this time. Simply because, the main role of a childcare worker is to care for, right, is to care for others. And during this crisis, it has become more essential, more than ever, for childcare workers to begin to take care of themselves, to first to begin to take care of oneself, right, in order to be able to care for others. So again, childcare workers are essential. In my view, they're essential. Um, and their role is really important and unique, again, because your main role is to care for others. But during this crisis, it's become really essential to pay attention to ourselves, to begin to take care of ourselves in order for us to be able to take care of others. How can we cope with this pandemic? Understanding our feelings. What does this mean for me? Right? Understanding what this means for me is a way of coping. Understanding that this is new and unprecedented for all of us. And really paying attention to who do I listen to? So, what am I feeling? Being able to identify your feelings is really key in helping us cope and deal with this pandemic. Understanding our reactions and our actions. Being able to make decisions, best possible decisions. Do I want it to continue to feel this way? Is a decision we get to make. If you're feeling irritable, do I want to continue to feel this way? Also, we do have control. There is a decision to be made. We may feel that so many things are out of our control, but many times, well, many things are in our control. And so we have a decision to make, to be aware, first of all, and to know that I have control in my daily life of so many things, of things like, the time I wake up, what I do with my time in the morning, to help myself gather my thoughts, what I'm going to eat today, what time am I going to go to sleep, when do I decide to connect with friends, when I don't, what I watch, what I don't watch, who do I listen to, who I don't listen to. These are all decisions that we're able to make and give us a sense of control. So identifying and trusting your feelings, right? So it's important to again, what am I feeling? Identify our feelings. What am I feeling? One way to do this is to be able to just take some time alone and just really sit and ask yourself, what am I feeling? And trusting your feelings, trusting our feelings. So this is a great way, again, to connect with ourselves, and versus being inundated with so much information that's out there. It's essential for us to retreat back to ourselves and to ask ourselves, what is it that I'm feeling? And to trust that these feelings are valid. I want to go into more about our feelings, right? Because they're so important. They're part of our everyday lives, right? Our feelings, knowing that they can change. There's nothing wrong, with feeling good, feeling happy, feeling optimistic in the morning, and then maybe throughout the day you're feeling less optimistic. You're feeling maybe sad or stressed, because our feelings can change, and that's okay, and that's normal. We can have a mix of emotions. We are superhuman in that way. We can feel a lot of different emotions. When we get confronted with different kinds of news or information, sometimes we don't know what to feel. We say, like, I don't know what to feel. And sometimes that's because we have a mix of emotions. And so being able to understand our emotions, identifying them is helpful. Honor what you are feeling at the moment, right? So not avoiding it. Remember, we said that if you're feeling fear, sometimes you want to avoid it because it's uncomfortable, but it's important to feel our fear. So with that, going back to that, it's important to know with any of our feelings, it's important to honor them at the moment. give them their space, allow them to do what they're here to do, which is to give us information and to allow us to process what's important. And basically that leads to, communicating. Our feelings really communicate to us. Confronting this new pandemic, right? How do we confront, not only cope, but how do we confront this new pandemic? And to me, what came up for me to be able to put in this webinar is to know that you have more control than you think. So when we think of confronting this new pandemic and what we have ahead of us and what we can do, it's important to know that we have more control than we think. What do I listen to? What do I listen to? So social media, right? I think most of us are in social media. And so it's important to pay attention. What am I listening to? What am I reading? What am I allowing myself to receive? And social media really can be supportive if it's a way, again, of connecting with others, but really know that it's not a source of information, right? It's not a credible source of information. Like social media was not meant to be a source of information, but it has, right? It has become a source of information. Many people will receive a lot of information that we get from the news, and then we share it on social media, right? So it ends up being a source of information, but we don't want to treat it that way in terms of the pandemic. We don't want to receive all of our information that we're going to say, okay, this is the way things are from social media. We want to be able to receive. So receiving information, how do we want to receive it? We want to be able to receive information through credible, trusted, and knowledgeable sources. So who are these credible, trusted, and knowledgeable sources? So we all can have different ideas about this, right? Different opinions. So you can decide for yourself what is a credible source of information. And so having one or two, right? So I put here, like, limit what you listen to. And I guess that goes just also with social media, right? It's like limiting our social media is important, and limiting, what we listen to, what we read, our credible and trusted, knowledgeable sources, keep them to one or two. I think that is great, again, in terms of being able to confront this pandemic, to cope with it in the best way possible, and to just help us feel less stress. What you focus on grows. I love this so much, because I think that this is just something that we can remember, something to remember for us in our everyday lives. What we focus on grows. So if we're focusing on the negative grows. If we focus on the positive, it grows. And it's not to say that it's magic, but really our thoughts are very powerful. So whatever is on your mind the most, like, that's what you're going to continue to feel like, right? So if I focus on what I don't know, what I can't control, I'm going to feel scared, and I'm going to feel stressed, and I'm going to feel anxious. And so that is going to grow, right? So the more I feed myself that's going to grow. But if I focus on, like, I do have the ability to make decisions, I can make decisions, I do have control over many things in my life. And so that helps us feel more calm. It helps us feel more at peace. And so then that grows, right? That feeling of peace grows, that feeling of like, okay, I can do this grows. And so it's really, really, I love this phrase, what you focus on grows, which leads us to having helpful thoughts during COVID, right? So what are some helpful thoughts to have? First of all, how do we go about having helpful thoughts during this time? One of them is being aware of the unhelpful thoughts, right? That's one of the ways that we can get to having more helpful thoughts, is being aware of the unhelpful thoughts, being aware of the negative thoughts that are possibly, again, not helping us sleep, that are making it so that we feel more anxious, more stressed, and more fearful, right? Being aware, what are you thinking? What are the thoughts? What are the kinds of thoughts that go through your mind? So being more aware. Focusing, like we said, right? What you focus on grows. Focusing more on the thoughts you want to have. And thinking about, well, if I have more helpful thoughts, like, I can make decisions, there are things that I do know right now, those will help us feel a certain way more positively, right? So we want to focus more on having more of these helpful thoughts to help us also feel better. And we want to practice them, right? We want to practice them. We want to use them. We just don't want to know like we can have helpful thoughts or unhelpful thoughts. That's not enough. We need to practice. We need to practice using these helpful thoughts more and more frequently because, again, right, what you focus on grows. And we have to practice using these helpful thoughts so that they can grow and that we can feel ultimately better. How do I move ahead? How do I move ahead? We have already been moving towards a new normal, right? Slowly and surely, we've been giving guidelines and we've been adjusting to a new normal. And so we've already been moving ahead since at least March, right? We know that if depending on when you're listening to this, but you can look back and say, yes, we are definitely moving forward and we can continue to move forward. And so how can I continue to keep moving forward in the best way possible? One way is being in acceptance, right? Well, I guess there's this question, right? Or we accept where we are, or we are in defiance of where we are, right? We're like denying what is happening. And so for us to help to move forward in the best possible way, it's important to be in acceptance of where we are, right? That just allows us to move forward. We can be in flow or we can be stagnant. We can feel stuck. So when we think about moving forward, right, we want to be in a flow. We don't want to get stuck. So slowly moving forward, we're in acceptance, right? Acceptance of what is, and that will help us also be in a flow versus feeling stuck. Like it's, if you've ever felt stuck before, it's kind of like you don't know what to do. But as we move forward, as we have things to guide us, certain thoughts that guide us, certain guidelines to follow, it helps us be in the flow. Strategies to cope with COVID-19. So I'm just going to go over some basic strategies that I know all of you, to some degree or other, have heard of, right? And so a lot of these things that I suggest, to my clients who are going through depression or anxiety. And so with COVID, it's no different, right? Because COVID is causing people a lot of stress, anxiety, trauma, etc. And so getting sufficient sleep is so important to cope, right? We need to give ourselves the best possible treatment. And so one of the ways is getting sufficient sleep, eating the best way that we can, and exercising, moving our body. I love this slide because it reminds me so much of another wonderful way to take care of ourselves, right? Is just being with ourselves. Remember, we did a little breathing exercise at the beginning. And so we can do that. We can just take a couple of minutes, seconds even, right? If you don't have minutes, to just sit and breathe. Inhale and exhale deeply, like 3 times like we did. We can practice meditation. We can practice guided meditation. So more strategies. Again, breathing is very helpful. Connecting with other people is really great. Again, because we've been in this pandemic for a little bit anyways, we have been able to connect more with other people, seeing more people in person. But with this comes, right, some risks, but still, at least we're able to connect with people. And we do have, again, our phones and other ways, other technologies that can help us connect with others. So we don't want to isolate, basically. We want to connect with others, even if it's not seeing them in person, but texting, FaceTiming, Skype, Zoom, all of these different things to connect with other people. Journaling is another great way to cope. Expressing your feelings, just being able to express your feelings to someone, being able to say, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling stressed. These are all helpful ways to cope with this pandemic. And to close, I'm going to go just have these final comments have to do with just, some things to remember. Remember I said like initially these 5 R's. So remember, recognize barriers, reminders, recommendations, and resources. So here we go. Remember, COVID-19 is a pandemic that has affected billions of people, and the consequences of this pandemic has has had a large scale impact, right, all over the world and on a local and personal level, anywhere from the economy, the way we socialize, and even an impact to our mental health. This is why we're even having this webinar, right? Because we know that this pandemic, this crisis, has been affecting our mental health. We need to recognize barriers. Mental health, there's still a stigma when it comes to mental health, right? Especially in communities of color. So we must recognize that this is a barrier, right? The stigma that exists is a barrier for people to seek help. And so recognizing this and talking about it, right? So if you have ever sought mental health treatment, um, and you've had a positive experience, which hopefully you have, it's okay to let other people know you've had a positive experience. Not too long ago, a potential client was excited to make an appointment with me because she had heard from her roommates um, that they've been in therapy or they are in therapy and they're having like, you know, it's just been so helpful for them. So their enthusiasm was basically something that helped her reach out for help, right? So the more we talk about mental health as something normal and appropriate to receive, right? The more people, well, it gets destigmatized, right? Like we don't have to have that stigma anymore. And therefore, there is more people receiving the guidance and the support that they need. Another barrier is not knowing, right? Not knowing when to seek professional help. Sometimes people just don't know. They're like, they know they're feeling a certain way. They're not feeling great. They're just like, don't have a lot of motivation. They're tired. They're fatigued. They can't concentrate, anxious all the time. And sometimes they don't know when to seek help. So let me go over that a little bit. It's important. Well, we're going to go into a little bit, but basically towards the end. But this is just to know, like, this is a barrier, right? Not knowing when to seek professional help is a barrier um, to again receiving treatment and just getting the help that we need. Remember, your mental and emotional health are part of your general well-being. Okay, that's first and foremost, remember that, right? There's nothing wrong with a person having a mental health challenge, right? Just like there's nothing wrong with anyone having a physical health challenge, right? But these two components, right, our mental and emotional health are part of our well-being. So we want to kind of embrace, right? Embrace our mental and emotional health so that we can recognize it as part of our general well-being. Remember, and this is like remember and a reminder, right? You are not alone. There there are definitely people that are there to provide you the support and guidance. All you have to do is ask and seek, and you will receive. You are not alone. There are so many people that are struggling right now, that are having a difficult time. So you are not the only one. Remember, you are not alone. You always have options. There are people who are there for you. There are people to turn to for professional guidance, or even if it's just you need to talk to someone. People are more than willing to be there for other people. So know you always have the options, and there's someone to turn to. So as I was saying earlier, this is where I was, right? Knowing when to seek professional help. So this is my recommendation. Seek professional help if you have any of the following symptoms for more than 2 weeks. If you're feeling sad or depressed, if you're having difficulty sleeping, if you're having difficulty completing your daily activities, if you have a loss of interest in things you used to enjoy, again, difficulty sleeping, like, you just like wake up during the night, or you just takes you too long to go to sleep. If you're either overeating or you have a loss of appetite, if you have low motivation, low energy, if you're not able to focus or concentrate like you used to, or if you feel like, what, I just rather be alone, but it's just like, it's like you just rather be alone a lot more than usual. That's when you know that you want to seek professional help. And how? Well, this goes to the resources, the last R, right? Resources. How to seek professional help. Many people don't know, like, where do I begin? So it could be as simple as someone asking someone and trust and say, hey, have you ever seen a therapist, or have you ever sought professional help? I'm not sure, how to go about it. So ask someone, they may be able to point you in the right direction. If you have health insurance, you can call your health insurance, and they have a list of providers that can, they have a list of providers and their contact information. So you can receive or seek support through your health insurance, right? So they'll be able to provide you with a list of providers. Some instances, there's actually a certain department, depending on the health insurance, and they will seek the no the provider for you. That also happens many times. I get calls from insurance companies where they're trying to connect their member through your primary care. If you have a primary care, then that's great. Then they can also refer you to a mental health professional. Community health centers are also a great source, a great resource for you to go to. We have so many wonderful mental community health agencies that you can seek resources from. So don't hesitate to go there and see what they have available as well. And also through ZenCare. Through ZenCare, you can just go Google zencare.co, and you will find there this wonderful system where you can find providers in your area. And you can see people's profiles. You can see a video about what they're all about. You can see what their availability is. You can see what insurance they have. They take all of that, and you can see if they're seeing people in person, if they're only seeing people online. There's a lot of information. So I highly recommend zencare.com. But as you see here, there are definitely many ways for you to seek professional help. So we have come to the end of our webinar. I want to just thank each and every one of you for being here, for being attentive to this webinar. And I hope it has served you in the best possible way. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.